people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
The undisputed super featherweight champion of the world, Alicia, the Bumgarner.
That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the Tommy Fury versus KSI crossover circus fight. Tommy Fury, who post-fight stated, I said I beat these two inside 12 months, and guess what? I beat Jake Paul on his own show, and I beat KSI on his own show. I'm the head of this table now. There's nobody else that can call the shots. I am the man in crossover boxing now. I run it.
Whatever that's worth.
The more you see, the more you hear from Tommy Fury, the more you realize that this guy was never a serious boxer, a serious pugilist
He wasn't.
to begin with. Tommy continued, was it my best performance? No, absolutely not. But we knew it was going to be a stinkfest because he didn't want to come to fight. This guy was hopping up and down and didn't want to engage. It was a horrible fight and a shit performance. I've still come out with the win. I want to thank the judges for scoring it evenly.
Now, some thought that KSI had done enough to win the fight. I think Chris Eubank Jr. thought that KSI had done enough to win the fight. Joe Markowski of DAZN, he did.
Myself, I thought it was an even contest. I thought a draw in what was that 6-rounder. I thought a draw might have made sense. You know, you have to tack on the point deduction. I believe that was in the second round. Tommy Fury rabbit punching KSI, subsequently being deducted a point for doing so. I think a draw would have made sense.
It would.
What was mostly a scrappy affair, a messy affair between what appeared to be two novices, two guys that don't have that much experience. For me and my money, every time I see Tommy in one of these crossover things, he's just not creating enough separation, a distinction between himself and a KSI and himself and a Jake Paul to where you look like one of those guys.
Those guys, I wouldn't give any of those guys any odds to become world champions in this sport, but I wouldn't give Tommy any odds either.
Tommy Fury sucks. If you caught yesterday's circus fight, you would have seen that Tommy Fury was struggling to land clean punches, clean shots, struggling to land cleanly in what was mostly a clinch fest. More often than not, these guys just became entangled in each other, giving each other that much respect as to close the gap, not give the other man enough room to throw. They were both doing this.
Hugging it out.
They were both doing this. It wasn't just KSI. You know, KSI and his telegraphed right hand often overshooting the distance, and when he did, he'd end up in a clinch, initiate a clinch with Tommy, but Tommy initiated a few of those clinches himself. He didn't create clear and distinct separation between what is himself, what's supposed to be the professional boxer, and the novice.
He didn't.
And after the fight, Tommy declared that he had no intention of giving KSI a rematch and may now leave crossover boxing. He goes his way, I go mine. I'm done with all this shit, all this crossover shit. I'm on to my next challenge now. I'm done with the bullshit. Fuck the bullshit.
You are bullshit.
Let's get it straight. Tommy Fury lacks the skill, the ability to have made the kind of money that he made boxing the likes of Jake Paul, boxing the likes of KSI, by boxing serious fighters and serious pugilists. That's basically saying that I don't think Tommy would have got to the point where he's making 7 figures a fight by fighting real fighters. This was the only way for him to do that when you think about it.
He was never going to get to the point to where he's making 7 figures a fight in real fights with real fighters because he's not a real fighter. This was the only way. Crossover boxing.
It's the only way possible for Tommy Fury to make 7 figures in a fight, because if he were just fighting your run-of-the-mill gatekeepers, your run-of-the-mill journeymen en route to an area title or an EBU title, well, he lacks the ability.
He should be thankful.
He should be thanking Jake Paul. He should be thanking KSI that they let him participate, that they let him be a part of that scene and be in that lane, because if not for that, this guy was never going to make 7 figures for a fight.
Because he would have got beat before that.
I mean, outside of his namesake, Tommy Fury Tommy Fury's boxing, I don't see a world champion. I don't see anything. I just see a guy who's riding his older brother's wave and crashing someone else's scene, someone else's party, because influencer boxing is for influencers and those who follow them. Tommy Fury himself, he's not an influencer, though he aspires to be.
Well, no, he says he's done. He says he's done with that whole scene. He's done with crossover boxing.
Though I don't believe him. The money that he made from those two fights with those two social media influencers is by and large more money than he made in any of his legitimate boxing matches, and I hardly think he's gonna go back to fighting for 6 figures or just above 6 figures at the York Hall, at the Copper Box, against gatekeepers. He's not gonna step into the fire after that. Why would he? He knows his limitations.
Jake Paul knocked him down off a jab.
And he just had a stinker with KSI. If you're a serious boxer, that's not how this is supposed to go. That's not how this is supposed to go down. You couldn't stop either of those two guys. And those two guys ain't boxers. You're supposed to be.
Even if he is done with crossover boxing, there's not enough ability there for serious boxing, for real boxing.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if Tommy Fury resumed his real boxing career. What boxing career? Overall, it was cringeworthy, and all it proved is that Tommy Fury is not that far removed from boxers that don't box.
It's really not that much better than these guys.
Then move over to the main event of this weekend's top-ranked card, the unification match between the IBF champion Vincenzo Gualtieri and the WBO champion Janibek Alimkhanuly. And you didn't need to be Burt Sugar to call the outcome of this match. In the first round, we saw Janibek staying behind his jab, managing the distance and applying pressure periodically, backing Vincenzo into the ropes here and there. Janibek utilized his jab most of the round, and it was mostly a quiet round. Things picked up a little more in the second round. More aggression from Janibek, still managing the distance and regularly countering Vincenzo. Got off a good-looking liver shot.
It was established early that Janibek was a lot faster and a lot stronger than Vincenzo.
That was established in the first 2 rounds. In the third, Janibek got off a strong left uppercut to Vincenzo's face, then another strong left to the body. Janibek was opening up more, breaking down Vincenzo, consistent with the jab and consistent with the half step back and the counter. It's not that Vincenzo wasn't trying for punches, wasn't trying for shots. It's that he realized very quickly to be too ambitious.
If he would have opened up sooner, tried for more punches sooner, the fight would have ended sooner, much sooner than 6 rounds.
Clean sweep for Janibek Alimkhanuly after 4 rounds. Clean sweep after 5. Janibek started stringing punches together in the 5th round, stepping on the gas. Great counter uppercut that staggered Vincenzo Gualtieri, but he survived it, along with a strong right hook to the body.
This was one of the more one-sided unification matches I've ever seen between 2 champions, 2 unbeaten champions.
So I say it all the time. There's more to boxing than what you see on paper. And while ahead of this fight, they might have both been unbeaten champions, unbeaten on paper. Not all unbeaten fighters are created equal. Not all unbeaten champions. We saw that yesterday.
That's what we saw.
You see how Vincenzo looked opposite the ring Janibek Alimkhanuly, and you asked yourself, how the hell did this guy ever get an alphabet title? How the hell did he become a world champion? And what it really was a byproduct of Gennady Golovkin leaving the sport, or leaving his titles behind at least.
Yeah.
He was under orders to satisfy his mandatory challenger in Esquiva Falcao, but he decided to vacate the title instead. And as a result of that, what we ended up getting was Esquiva Falcao versus Vincenzo Gualtieri. That's how it happened. Neither guy is world level, Neither guy was world class.
The middleweight division just ain't what it used to be.
And I can hardly begrudge the people at Top Rank and Janibek's handlers for making this unification match in a timely fashion, because what are the other 2 champions at this weight doing? What's Lara up to? Jamal, he's been missing in action for close to 3 years.
He's supposed to be fighting Jose Benavidez on the undercard of Benavidez versus Andre.
Lara's supposed to be fighting Danny Garcia on the undercard of Floyd Mayweather's next exhibition match or ring appearance or whatever it is he's doing. The other 2 champions at the weight, they weren't available. This guy was. They made the fight in a timely fashion, and it's the best you could do at the time.
I won't fault them for that.
In the 6th round, we saw Janibek Alimkhanuly turn the heat up on Vincenzo Gualtieri. Big pressure from Janibek backing off Vincenzo. Good counter uppercut that staggered Vincenzo for the second time in the fight. 3 clubbing left hands from out of the southpaw stance. 3 clubbing left hands from Janibek Alimkhanuly, staggering him. Janibek stepping into those punches and backing Vincenzo into the ropes, allowing Janibek to put even more punches together, unloading, at which point the referee waved it off. Mercy stoppage.
My thoughts.
I don't really know what they're going to do for him now. The scarcity of big names and big fights in today's middleweight division, it's something that Top Rank has to try and work around, to try and get their fighter more fights. They could see about making a fight between Janibek Alimkhanuly and Carlos Adames, the WBC's interim champion. They've had 1 or 2 back and forths on social media expressing an interest in doing a fight between them. It's not like Carlos Adames is on the eve of getting a Charlo fight, getting his title shot, so get him another shot at another title with another champion. Get him a Janibek Alimkhanuly fight. Not dissimilar from what we're seeing downstairs at 135 between Shakur Stevenson and Edwin De Los Santos. When things didn't work out with Frank Martin,
They got Edwin. It's not like the PBC was using him for much.
and the PBC doesn't appear to be using Carlos Adames for much. You know, he's still waiting for Jermall Charlo to come back, still waiting for him to get around to giving him a title shot. So while he waits, why don't the people at Top Rank get in contact with him the same way they got in contact with Edwin De Los Santos and do a fight? Do a fight between Janibek and Carlos. The fighters seem to want it. The fans would enjoy it.
Carlos is a relatively inexpensive option for Janibek. He's not the kind of guy you gotta break the bank to get him in the ring.
Give him a call. See if he accepts. And if he doesn't, well, at least you tried. You have to try.
It's an avenue they should explore beyond this weekend's fight.
Finally, what was a better, more entertaining, and more competitive fight south of middleweight at junior middleweight, the WBO title fight between Tszyu and Brian Mendoza, fight that lived up to my expectations. I expected this to be an entertaining and competitive fight. That's what it was. Educated pressure from Tszyu against the very live Brian Mendoza.
Tim is a pressure fighter.
Though not all pressure fighters are created equal. Both Tszyu and Sebastian Fundora are pressure fighters, and there are glaring disparities between them, as well as Tszyu and the likes of a Roman Villa. Some pressure fighters are a lot more rough around the edges, are a lot more simple and basic than others, whereas
Tim's pressure, his brand of pressure fighting, is a lot more well thought out. Great punch picking.
some pressure fighters, the more crude ones, they're almost bordering on brawlers. Your Sebastian Fundora, your Brian Castano. These guys are all about volume. That's how they apply pressure. They close the gap and unload. Swinging shots, swinging punches, constantly throwing punches, which leaves them open to be countered in between the punches, whereas Tim applies pressure with poise. Patience, and presence. He stays with you, he stays on you, he'll use that jab to try to open you up, and if he doesn't open you up, his proximity to you lures you to throw so he can counter what you throw. He countered Brian Mendoza effectively several times yesterday with a counter left hand, slipping Brian Mendoza's straight right to counter it with his counter left.
He was landing that punch all night. The counter left hand was sweet in Australia.
Saw the counter left hand from Tszyu. We saw the uppercut up the middle within close quarters in the phone booth. He staggered Brian Mendoza with that punch. Staggered him once or twice. That in terms of variety, we saw a good counter left hand. We saw an effective uppercut. We even saw a couple of good right hands. Brian Mendoza, he took them well.
And some good jabs in between. That Tszyu, he hit this guy with every kind of punch you can hit a guy with.
And Brian took the punches well. He did. Survived some very scary moments. Did some fighting back. This was a more competitive fight than the middleweight contest, the middleweight title fight between Janibek Alimkhanuly and Vincenzo Gualtieri. Brian did some fighting back. The problem was a lot of his shots were getting blocked. Parried, countered.
Janibek Gualtieri, before the stoppage, before the knockout, I had that 6 rounds for Janibek, whereas this was something like 8-4, maybe 9-3 in favor of Tszyu, but Brian acquitted himself well.
Better than Vincenzo Gualtieri did against Janibek. Brian Mendoza moving around, fighting for space, fighting for real estate, trying to catch Tszyu in between the punches, but ultimately being unsuccessful. Tim's pressure is all about poise, patience and presence. He stays on top of you. That pace.
And that power.
Tim's got power. It's consistent fight by fight. He's got power. But Brian's got a chin. He survived some really scary moments. Moments where it looked like he was going to go out. But he stayed in the fight. Credit to him. Tszyu stalking his quarry. Stalking Brian Mendoza. Walking Brian Mendoza down. Breaking him down. Either forcing him to move to exhaust his energy reserves or forcing him to trade, to open him up and land punches. Big punches. And he was wearing those punches, wearing them on his face.
Right eye was all puffed up from the counter left hooks. Later on into the fight, he suffers a cut right on the eyelid of his left eye.
And that's gotta sting. Every time the guy blinks, he's gonna feel that cut. That's a bad place for a cut. The worst place for a cut, because the blood, it could seep right into the eye. Hamper a fighter's vision. Tszyu was battering Brian Mendoza, but once again, Brian acquitted himself well and managed to hang on, managed not to get stopped, while throwing punches of his own, most of which were blocked.
Was a great fight. I feel like Tszyu, at least here and now, he's got to be the #1 junior middleweight in the world, I think.
I mean, we can argue about Jermell Charlo and what he is to today's junior middleweight division. He's currently under orders to satisfy his mandatory challenger by way of the IBF in Bakram Murtazaliev. He's all tied up with that. I'm not even sure if that fight is going to happen. They've got, 28, 27 days to reach a deal before it goes to purse bid?
I'm not sure it happens.
So what should Tszyu do now? Who should he fight? And I feel like he should wait out that situation between Jermell and Bakram Murtazaliev, because if the fight doesn't happen, who he can get in the ring next is Bakram Murtazaliev for what could be the IBF, the newly vacated IBF. You think about all this stuff happening just at or around these weights. Terrence Crawford, that stuff with Spence, the rematch clause, whether or not that even goes down. Terrence's desire to face Canelo, but Canelo's aversion to it. Perhaps if he can't get Canelo in the ring, he can fight Tszyu for what could be 1 or 2 alphabet titles, if it happens down the line, depending on what happens.
Tim continues to impress.
Who seems a lot hungrier than some other fighters, hence him being busier than a lot of other fighters. What was this? His 3rd fight this year? And every time he fights, the Australians, they show up for it. They show out.
He's made for TV. A fan-friendly fighter that loves to fight, wants to fight, tries to fight. The best guys available.
Brian's a tough guy. He's a tough customer. And Tim, he never had to fight Brian Mendoza. He wanted to fight Brian because he couldn't get Jermell. So Brian, having knocked out Sebastian Fundora, was the next best thing. And look at what he did to Brian. Congratulations to Tim Tszyu.
He gained some valuable experience in that 12-rounder. It went 12.
You learn more in 12 with a good fighter than you learn in 1 with a ham and egger.